In the early light of August 2008, Atlanta, Georgia, was veiled in a stillness that foreshadowed the storm about to rip through a seemingly perfect family. At first glance, the Thompson household radiated success, wealth, and community admiration. But as the days would soon reveal, these facades were only thin layers stretched over deep fractures, with secrets buried just below the surface, secrets that, if unearthed, would tear their lives apart. William "Bill" Thompson was the embodiment of the American dream, or at least that's what everyone believed. Growing up the youngest of three in a struggling family, Bill had always been the one who stood out, a sharp mind with a relentless drive to succeed. By age 56, he was a respected businessman with a popular chain of hardware stores that spread throughout Georgia. However, success often carries its own silent price. Bill had perfected the art of hiding his struggles, but the pressures had accumulated like lead within his soul. From the outside, Bill was charismatic, respected, and generous. He was often seen hosting charity events, appearing in the local press as a patron of the community. Yet behind his practiced smile, Bill bore unresolved questions about who he was. There was a boyish part of him, deeply hidden, practically forgotten, that remained locked in the summer of his 17th year, in a memory that clashed fiercely with his chosen path. As his influence and visibility grew, so did his discontent, even as he remained dutiful to his image and the loving wife who believed in him, Vanessa. The strain was now reaching a breaking point, evident in the brief but potent glances he exchanged with certain men at social events. It was a subtle, unspoken recognition, a glimpse into a hidden world that only he knew existed. And then there was Darius, a young man Bill had helped to shape, but whose presence now stirred a conflict within him too tangled to untangle. Vanessa had always been the steady center of the Thompson household, known for her nurturing spirit and steadfast morals. As an English teacher, she inspired countless students to strive for success, yet her real joy lay in her family. Her son Darius, a bright and ambitious engineering student, was her pride. When she married Bill, she believed she was building a future, a safe harbor for herself and her child. Yet Darius, who had struggled with the absence of his biological father, held a guarded distance. Bill's efforts to bond with him seemed forced at times, clumsy attempts that didn't quite bridge the chasm left by Darius's past disappointments. Darius, who felt constantly under the shadow of his mother's idealized version of family life, grew resentful even as he excelled academically and in sports. The discipline of wrestling provided a refuge, a place where he could pour his frustrations into his performance on the mat rather than reveal his vulnerability to the outside world. Bill's home life, once his sanctuary, began to feel like a series of performances. There was Vanessa, with her unyielding devotion and belief in the picture-perfect family she had so carefully nurtured, and Darius, with his quiet resentment simmering just beneath the surface. Bill was a father figure to the young man, but their connection was strained, laced with unresolved tension neither could voice. The house itself felt stifling. Late at night, Bill often found himself wandering its corridors in silence, his hand brushing the walls as if they could somehow anchor him. He would often pause outside Darius's room, staring at the closed door. He told himself he was worried about Darius's future, his well-being, but deep down, he knew his feelings were dangerously complex, a knot of emotions he feared unraveling. One night, as Bill passed by, he heard muffled voices from Darius's room. Pausing, he realized Darius was on the phone, laughing with someone. It was a laugh he hadn't heard from him in years, a genuine laugh that hinted at something beyond anger, beyond pain. For Bill, that laugh sparked something foreign in him, envy. The young man seemed to have found a connection that Bill himself could not have, locked as he was in his world of public appearances and private doubts. Bill went to bed that night filled with an unnamed ache. And in the darkness of his room, he grappled with questions that plagued him. Had his life, so meticulously crafted, actually brought him happiness? Did the facade of family mean anything if it was built on secrets and suppression? Darius had always been close to his mother. Vanessa was his source of strength and guidance, and she had been his rock through the absence of his biological father. Yet, since moving in with Bill, he felt a shift, an unspoken tension he couldn't quite identify. Something about Bill felt off, a sense of careful control that seemed to mask something hidden. One afternoon, while rummaging through some old files in the basement, Darius stumbled upon a locked drawer in Bill's desk. He knew he shouldn't pry, but curiosity got the better of him. After a bit of effort, he managed to open it, revealing a collection of letters and photographs that puzzled him. Some of the letters were written in a handwriting he didn't recognize, filled with words that seemed intensely personal. As he read them, a realization dawned: Bill had been writing to another man. Darius felt a wave of shock and confusion. His stepfather, the man who had represented a stable family unit for him, was hiding a side of himself that Darius had never suspected. The discovery left him reeling, stirring conflicting emotions he struggled to process. Part of him felt betrayed, another part felt an unexpected pang of understanding. For weeks after the discovery, Darius avoided Bill, retreating further into his studies and wrestling. He couldn't look Bill in the eyes, fearing that his own emotions might betray what he now knew. Bill sensed Darius's newfound coldness, but couldn't understand it. Every interaction became tense, each conversation a strained exchange of words that fell flat, heavy with unspoken grievances. Vanessa noticed the change too, but attributed it to typical familial adjustment issues and Darius's own stress with school. One evening, while they all sat in uncomfortable silence at the dinner table, Bill finally broke. "Is everything all right with you, Darius? You've seemed distant lately." Darius looked up, his gaze meeting Bill's for the first time in days. There was a flash of anger in his eyes, quickly masked, but not quick enough. "Everything's fine," he said flatly, stabbing his fork into his food with a little more force than necessary. The tension was unbearable, and Vanessa shifted in her seat, glancing between them. "Darius, maybe you should take a break, spend some time with your friends. I know you've been under a lot of pressure lately," she suggested softly, trying to ease the atmosphere. Darius forced a smile but said nothing more, his thoughts racing. He wanted to confront Bill, to demand the truth, but fear held him back. How would Vanessa react if she knew the truth about her husband? And did he really want to be the one to shatter her illusion of a perfect family? The final confrontation came one rainy night in September. The storm outside echoed the turmoil within the Thompson household. Unable to contain his feelings any longer, Darius found Bill in the study, going over some business documents. "We need to talk," Darius said, his voice low but firm. Bill looked up, sensing the gravity in Darius's tone. He set aside his work and met Darius's gaze. "All right. What's on your mind?" "I know about the letters," Darius said, struggling to keep his voice steady. "I found them in your drawer." Bill's face went pale. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. The weight of his secret, so carefully guarded for years, now felt like a crushing boulder pressing down on him. "I didn't want to believe it," Darius continued, his voice shaking with both anger and something akin to sorrow. "All these years, I thought you were different. That you were here for my mother, for me. But you're living a lie." Bill's hands trembled as he tried to find the right words. "Darius, it's complicated." "Complicated?" Darius laughed bitterly. "Is that what you tell yourself to sleep at night? That it's complicated?" Bill closed his eyes, absorbing the full weight of his stepson's accusation. He wanted to explain, to make Darius understand, but how could he justify years of hiding? "I never wanted to hurt anyone. Least of all you or your mother. I've fought with this part of myself for as long as I can remember." "Then maybe you should have stayed away from us," Darius shot back, his voice breaking. "You could have spared us all the pain." Bill sank into his chair, his head in his hands. For the first time, he felt the full extent of his deception, the ripple effect it had created. But he was too deep in his lies to simply walk away. "I'm sorry, Darius. I truly am. But I can't change who I am." The conversation ended abruptly as Darius stormed out of the study, leaving Bill alone to confront the wreckage of his choices. The storm outside continued, thunder rumbling as though the skies themselves were mirroring the chaos within their home. Days turned into weeks, and Vanessa sensed the growing distance between her husband and her son. She noticed the way Darius would avoid Bill's gaze, the tension that hung heavy in the air whenever they were in the same room. At first, she attributed it to Darius's age and natural resistance toward his stepfather. But as the weeks passed, her suspicions deepened. One afternoon, Vanessa found herself in the basement, organizing some boxes. She stumbled upon the same locked drawer in Bill's desk that Darius had found weeks prior. Intrigued by its secrecy, she searched for the key, eventually finding it tucked away under some papers. With a mixture of curiosity and dread, she unlocked the drawer, her hands trembling. Inside, she found the letters, fragments of a life she knew nothing about. Vanessa read a few lines, her stomach twisting as she pieced together the implications. Shock turned to heartbreak, and heartbreak turned to anger. This wasn't the man she thought she had married. Bill had lived a lie, and now she was the last to know. That evening, Vanessa confronted Bill. The quiet rage in her eyes left him speechless, unable to muster any defense. Their argument was subdued but fierce, words spoken in low voices to keep Darius from overhearing. "How could you do this to me, to us?" Vanessa demanded, her voice breaking. Bill could offer no solace, only apologies that rang hollow even to his own ears. As the night wore on, Vanessa realized that the man she had shared her life with was a stranger, a ghost of the man she had loved. And as she turned away from him, the warmth of their home felt as cold as a grave. For Darius, the days that followed were filled with a strange emptiness. He avoided home whenever he could, burying himself in his studies and spending countless hours at the gym. Wrestling became his lifeline, a place to channel the confusion and anger that simmered within him. Every time he grappled with an opponent, it wasn't just a competition, it was an escape, a way to wrestle with the betrayal he felt from Bill and the fear of shattering his mother's heart. During one of these sessions, Darius's best friend and teammate, Marcus, noticed his unusual intensity. "Man, you're pushing yourself hard," Marcus remarked, panting as they paused. "Something on your mind?" Darius hesitated, feeling the weight of his secret pressing down on him. Marcus was one of the few people he trusted, but how could he explain the twisted complexities of his family life? "It's family stuff," Darius said finally, his voice low. "Let's just say things aren't what I thought they were." Marcus nodded, sensing his friend's turmoil. "Whatever it is, you know I got your back." A part of Darius wanted to unburden himself, to confess everything. But the shame and confusion held him back, creating a wall he couldn't break through. Instead, he pushed down his feelings and refocused on his goals, clinging to the small fragments of control he still possessed. Vanessa was a woman of resilience. But now, left alone with her grief and a husband who had betrayed her trust, she found herself questioning everything she'd ever known. She spent long hours reflecting, retracing the moments in their marriage, searching for clues she might have missed. How had she been so blind to the man Bill truly was? One evening, after another tense, silent dinner, Vanessa gathered her courage and confronted Darius. She sensed he was hurting, too, though she couldn't fully understand why. "Darius," she began softly, joining him as he sat alone in the living room, his gaze distant. "I know things have been difficult lately. I can feel it. And I want you to know that you can talk to me about anything." Darius's jaw clenched, his heart aching as he looked into his mother's earnest eyes. How could he break her heart with the truth? How could he tell her that the man she loved had deceived them both? "I'm just dealing with a lot, Mom," he managed, his voice thick with emotion. "But I don't want to hurt you. I wish I could explain everything, but it's complicated." Vanessa reached out, placing a hand on his. "You don't have to carry this alone, Darius. Whatever it is, we can face it together." Her words resonated within him, stirring the tangled emotions he had tried to bury. He wanted to tell her, to let her in, but a part of him feared the devastation it would bring. Instead, he nodded silently, allowing her comfort to wash over him, even as he remained locked in his own prison of guilt and secrets. As the days passed, Bill's life began to unravel. His once meticulously crafted image was now marred by guilt, suspicion, and betrayal. Vanessa's coldness was a constant reminder of the walls he had built, and Darius's quiet anger was a searing wound that only deepened his self-loathing. To cope, Bill began drinking, seeking solace at the bottom of a glass. What had once been a man of control, of discipline and respect, was now a shadow of himself, spiraling further each day. He took his drinks in private, hoping to drown the memories, the regrets, and the forbidden desires that haunted him. One evening, lost in a haze of whiskey, Bill found himself pacing the darkened hallways of their house, the air heavy with silence. He paused outside Darius's room, the door slightly ajar, and peered inside. Darius was asleep, his face softened in the dim light, free from the tension that usually marred his features. For a moment, Bill was overwhelmed by a wave of conflicting emotions, regret, remorse, and an inexplicable tenderness. Here was a young man he had hoped to guide, to mentor, but he had instead brought pain and confusion into his life. The weight of his feelings was unbearable, and he turned away, retreating to his study, where he sat in the dark, wrestling with his inner demons. As Bill's behavior grew more erratic, whispers began to circulate within their affluent community. Neighbors noticed the distant glances, the quiet tension that surrounded the Thompsons whenever they attended local events. Tom Henderson, their next-door neighbor, was the first to suspect something amiss. He had always admired Bill but began to notice subtle changes, the forced smiles, the nervous glances, the way Bill seemed to be haunted by a secret. One afternoon, as Vanessa was out grocery shopping, Tom caught her outside and decided to offer his support. "Vanessa, I know it's none of my business," he said carefully, "but if there's anything you need, just know that we're here for you. Sometimes things can get tough, especially with family." Vanessa offered him a strained smile, touched by his kindness. She knew the neighbors had begun to notice the cracks in their picture-perfect life, but she was determined to keep the family's private struggles hidden. Her pride wouldn't allow her to share the depths of her heartache with anyone, least of all the people who had always seen them as a model family. "Thank you, Tom. We're managing," she replied, her voice steady despite the turmoil within her. "But it means a lot to know we have friends like you." As she walked away, Vanessa felt the burden of secrecy press down on her, making each step heavier than the last. The truth was eroding the foundation of their lives, and she didn't know how much longer she could keep the facade intact. The tension between Bill and Darius reached its peak one late autumn night. Darius had returned home from wrestling practice, exhausted but still burning with unresolved anger. He found Bill sitting alone in the dimly lit living room, nursing a drink, his eyes red and distant. For a moment, they stared at each other, the silence thick with unspoken accusations. "You have something to say?" Bill finally slurred, his voice heavy with defeat. "Or are you just going to keep glaring at me like I'm the devil himself?" Darius clenched his fists, his control slipping. "You ruined everything," he said, his voice low but filled with intensity. "I thought you were someone I could respect. But you're a coward, a liar who can't even be honest with his own family." Bill's expression darkened, his eyes narrowing. "You think I wanted this? You think I haven't been paying for my mistakes every day? Maybe if you actually cared, you wouldn't have betrayed us." Darius's voice broke, his emotions spilling over. "Do you even love Mom? Or is she just another part of your lie?" The accusation stung, cutting Bill to the core. He looked away, unable to meet Darius's gaze. "I love your mother," he said quietly, almost to himself. "But I don't know if I can ever be the man she thinks I am." Darius shook his head, disgusted. "Then maybe it's time you start facing the truth, instead of hiding behind lies." Without another word, Darius stormed out of the room, leaving Bill alone, consumed by guilt and shame. The confrontation marked a turning point, a moment where the last fragile threads of their family began to unravel completely. The following day, Vanessa found herself alone in the house, her mind racing with fragments of conversations, half-hidden glances, and the bitter tension that had been suffocating their home. She felt the urge to search, to find something that would confirm her growing suspicions. Her hands trembled as she sorted through Bill's study, finding letters and mementos she had never seen before. Then, she found it, a photograph tucked away in a book on Bill's desk. It was a candid shot, capturing Bill with a man she didn't recognize. They stood close, sharing a look that was more than friendship, a look that sent a shiver down her spine. She dropped the photograph, the reality of her husband's hidden life crashing down around her. When Bill returned home that evening, he found Vanessa waiting in the living room, her expression unreadable. She held the photograph in her hand, her gaze fixed on him as he walked in. "We need to talk, Bill," she said, her voice calm but resolute. "No more lies." Bill stood frozen, staring at the photograph Vanessa held with trembling hands. He didn't need to ask where she'd found it, he knew, as he always knew, that one day this moment would come. Yet, facing it now, he found himself unprepared, like a man caught in the eye of a storm he'd once seen on a distant horizon. "Vanessa," he began, but she raised a hand to stop him, her eyes blazing with a fury he had never seen before. "I don't want excuses, Bill. Not tonight." Her voice was eerily calm, each word like a dagger piercing the silence. "I need you to tell me the truth I've been too afraid to ask for." Bill took a deep breath, his mind racing with memories he had long since buried, the faces of people who had once been part of his hidden world. The shame, the guilt, all of it was now laid bare under her unyielding gaze. "I never wanted to hurt you, Vanessa," he whispered, his voice heavy with remorse. "I wanted to be the man you believed in, the man you and Darius deserved." Vanessa's expression softened, but only slightly. "Then why? Why would you lie to me for so long? Why let us believe in a life that was never real?" The silence stretched between them, an ocean of betrayal and grief. Bill struggled to find words, to explain his decades of deception, but he could only offer fragments. I was afraid. Of the life I might lose, of the people I might hurt. And I thought if I just buried it deep enough, it would go away. I thought I could live a life that was safe, a life I could control." Vanessa's eyes filled with tears, her voice breaking. "But we were your family, Bill. Didn't we deserve the truth?" Bill lowered his head, unable to face the pain he had inflicted. "You did. And I'm so sorry that I failed you." She turned away, holding herself as though to keep from shattering. The photograph slipped from her hand and fell to the floor, the echo of its landing reverberating through the room. She left Bill standing alone, surrounded by the remnants of a life that had been unraveling long before this moment. The morning after Vanessa's confrontation, Darius found her sitting alone on the porch, a distant look in her eyes. She seemed smaller somehow, as though the weight of her pain had diminished her spirit. Darius sat beside her in silence, offering his presence as she wrestled with the storm of her emotions. After a few moments, she turned to him, her eyes red-rimmed but resolute. "Darius, there are things you should know. Things I never imagined I'd have to tell you." Her words were measured, spoken as though each one was an admission of her own vulnerability. She recounted her confrontation with Bill, sparing Darius the most painful details but leaving enough for him to grasp the depth of the betrayal. Darius listened, his heart aching as he saw the raw pain etched into her face, the lines of grief that hadn't been there just days before. "Mom, he began, struggling to find words that could comfort her. "I knew. I found out some things too. I just didn't know how to tell you." Vanessa looked at him, her expression a mixture of surprise and understanding. "We've both been living with secrets, haven't we?" Darius nodded, his gaze falling to his hands. I kept quiet because I didn't want to hurt you. I didn't want you to know the kind of man he really was. Vanessa reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder. We can't change the past, Darius. But we can choose what we do next. Her words stirred something in him, a resolve that had been growing quietly beneath the surface. He couldn't protect her from the truth, but he could stand by her now, as they both sought to rebuild their lives from the wreckage of Bill's deception. With the truth finally laid bare, the fragile threads that had held the Thompsons together unraveled completely. Bill moved into a hotel, leaving Vanessa and Darius to confront the aftermath. Vanessa barely spoke to him, communicating only through brief messages regarding their separation and legal proceedings. Darius, meanwhile, struggled with conflicting emotions. Part of him felt vindicated, relieved to see Bill pay for the lies he had lived. Yet another part of him, the part that had once admired and respected Bill, felt hollow, a painful emptiness where trust and love had once resided. One evening, as Darius walked through the neighborhood, he ran into Tom, their neighbor, who looked at him with a mixture of sympathy and curiosity. Word had spread quickly in their tight-knit community, and the Thompsons' once proud home had become the center of whispered conversations and sidelong glances. Darius, Tom said gently, placing a hand on his shoulder. If you ever need to talk, I'm here. I know things can get messy in life, and sometimes it helps to have someone who's been through it. Darius nodded, grateful for the gesture, but he felt a sense of isolation that no neighborly kindness could fill. He walked home alone, the cool evening air doing little to ease the weight of betrayal that lingered in his heart. Bill spent his days in solitude, his hotel room filled with the silence he had once feared but now embraced. He looked out over the Atlanta skyline, feeling the bittersweet irony of his success. He had built an empire, achieved the dream that many envied, yet here he was, alone, with nothing but regrets as his companions. As the days passed, Bill found himself confronting parts of himself he had long suppressed. The allure of secrecy, the thrill of deception, they had all been part of a life that he had clung to, believing it could coexist with the life he shared with Vanessa and Darius. But now, with everything stripped away, he saw the truth for what it was, a hollow pursuit, a series of choices that had cost him the only real family he had ever known. One evening, he wrote a letter to Vanessa, pouring his heart onto the page in a final attempt to seek redemption. He acknowledged his failures, his cowardice, and the pain he had caused. He didn't ask for forgiveness, he knew he hadn't earned it, but he wanted her to know that, despite everything, he had loved her in his own way. He left the letter with the hotel manager, asking him to send it to Vanessa after he had checked out. In the weeks that followed, Vanessa and Darius began the slow process of healing. The emptiness left by Bill's absence was tangible, a wound that took time to close. They leaned on each other, finding strength in their shared resilience, and slowly, the house that had once held so much pain became a place of renewal. Vanessa returned to her work, immersing herself in her students' lives, finding purpose in their growth and success. Darius focused on his studies, pouring his energy into his future, determined to move beyond the shadow of betrayal that had once loomed over him. One day, while sorting through the mail, Vanessa came across Bill's letter. She opened it, reading his words in silence, feeling a mix of anger and sadness, but also a strange sense of closure. His words were raw, filled with a remorse that was palpable, and for the first time, she felt a faint glimmer of understanding, not forgiveness, but an acceptance of the man he had been, and the choices he had made. She folded the letter carefully, tucking it away in a drawer, a reminder of a chapter that was now closed. Months later, Vanessa and Darius stood together at the edge of their front lawn, watching as the trees shed their leaves, the crisp autumn air carrying a sense of renewal. They had been through a storm, one that had tested their strength, but they had emerged, scarred but whole. Are you ready for a fresh start? Vanessa asked, looking at Darius with a soft smile. Darius nodded, a new determination in his eyes. Yeah. I think it's time to move forward. Together, they walked back into the house, a house that was now theirs alone, free from secrets and shadows. It was a new beginning, a chance to build a life rooted in truth, and as they closed the door behind them, they knew they would face whatever came next, together.